It was November 12, 2017. A cold, crisp night had settled over the quiet town of Eastwood, Pennsylvania. The university campus lay draped in early winter stillness. Tall lamps cast pale yellow light over walkways, and the faint rustle of dry leaves whispered across the ground. Inside the library, fluorescent bulbs hummed, illuminating rows of students preparing for finals. Among them was Clara Matthews, 21 years old, junior, and one of the brightest students at Eastwood University. Clara had been there since late afternoon. Her small desk in the corner stacked with textbooks, notebooks, and a half-drunk coffee. She was preparing for an exam, yes, but her attention had been split. Between study notes and highlighted texts lay scattered scraps of paper with something else entirely. Financial figures, names, and cryptic phrases scribbled in her sharp, neat handwriting. Clara was a journalism major, and unlike many of her classmates, she wasn't interested in puff pieces or entertainment columns. She had ambition, an edge sharpened by curiosity. She wanted to investigate, to uncover, to peel back layers of comfort, and expose the uncomfortable truths that institutions would rather bury. On her laptop glowed a half-finished document titled, "The Money Trail, Eastwood's Silent Scandal." At 11:47 p.m., Clara packed her things. Surveillance cameras caught her walking to the exit, adjusting her coat, backpack slung over her shoulder. She waved briefly to the night librarian and pushed through the glass doors. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. By morning, Clara's absence was impossible to ignore. She missed a scheduled meeting with her study group. Her roommate noticed her bed hadn't been slept in. Her phone was on her desk, still charging. Her wallet and ID remained in her dorm drawer. Her car was untouched in the lot. When Clara didn't show up for classes, concern erupted. By evening, the police were called. Flyers were printed overnight, and by the following day her face, framed by soft brown hair and a shy but determined smile, was plastered across bulletin boards, telephone poles, and social media feeds. Her parents, Linda and Mark Matthews, arrived from Scranton within hours, clinging to the hope that this was some misunderstanding. But as detectives combed the campus, interviewed students, and scoured security footage, the chilling truth began to set in. Clara Matthews had vanished. At first, investigators considered the possibility that Clara had chosen to leave. Stress, mental health, pressure. These were easy explanations. But they crumbled quickly. Clara had no history of instability. Her professors described her as sharp, dependable, and disciplined. Her friends insisted she was happy, motivated, and full of plans. Then came the first thread. A security guard recalled seeing a dark sedan idling near the library around midnight. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Another student reported overhearing Clara on the phone days before her disappearance. Her tone urgent, almost anxious. And her laptop revealed encrypted files, password-protected documents that hinted at something bigger than coursework. Her notes contained fragments like administration laundering, scholarship fund diversions, Hargrove, source. It was enough to suggest Clara had been digging into something dangerous. Despite search parties, media coverage, and endless questioning, the trail went cold. Weeks turned to months. Months bled into years. Linda and Mark Matthews became tireless advocates, never letting Clara's name fade. They appeared on talk shows, stood at vigils, and fought for police resources. But every anniversary of Clara's disappearance was marked with the same bitter refrain, no answers. By 2020, most in Eastwood had quietly resigned themselves to a painful truth. Clara was gone, likely forever. But then came 2022. It happened by accident. A janitor cleaning an unused administrative office pulled out an old wooden desk to sweep behind it. As he tugged the drawer loose, something slipped. A sealed envelope, yellowed and taped to the underside. On the front, in neat black block letters, were the words, "If found, give to police. For Clara." The janitor hesitated, confused, then delivered it to campus security. Within hours, detectives had it in their hands. Inside was a single type sheet of paper. Clara was asking questions she shouldn't have. The answer is buried in the Eastwood Arboretum, near the old oak tree. Follow the stones. The campus shook with the news. After 5 years of silence, there was finally something tangible. Police searched the Arboretum, a sprawling wooded area used for student gatherings. Near the center stood a massive oak tree, centuries old. At its base, a strange arrangement of flat stones formed a rough circle. Beneath them, investigators unearthed a rusted tin box. Inside lay fragments of Clara's journal, pages she must have hidden herself. And tucked among them, her student ID badge, cracked and weathered but unmistakable. The journal scraps painted a chilling picture. Clara had been investigating financial irregularities at the university. Funds earmarked for student aid and research grants had been funneled into shell corporations. She listed names, administrators, trustees, donors. Her last entry, dated the night she vanished, read, "Meeting source at library. They said they'll bring proof. If this checks out, everything changes. Could be dangerous. But I have to know." The date matched her disappearance. Detectives zeroed in on Professor Daniel Hargrove, a journalism faculty member who had mentored Clara. Emails revealed he had warned her to be careful and not push too hard. Yet he had dismissed her theories as student exaggeration when interviewed back in 2017. Now new evidence suggested he had been more involved than he admitted. Surveillance from the night Clara vanished, grainy and long overlooked, showed a man resembling Hargrove walking near the dark sedan outside the library. Was he her source? Or her betrayer? The discovery split Eastwood in half. Students protested, demanding accountability. The Matthews family pressed harder than ever. And the FBI was brought in, uncovering undeniable proof of financial corruption at the university. Millions had been siphoned off. But corruption alone didn't explain Clara's disappearance. Eleanor Price, the private investigator hired by Clara's parents, suspected the envelope had been deliberately planted years later. A breadcrumb, or perhaps a cruel taunt. Her theory was chilling. Whoever silenced Clara, they wanted this to resurface. They wanted us to follow their trail. As the investigation reopened, more disturbing truths surfaced. Another student, a former classmate of Clara's, admitted she had seen Clara meeting secretly with an older man weeks before she vanished. He was never identified. An anonymous tip claimed Clara had confided she was afraid she'd uncovered too much. And then came the bombshell. DNA found on the rusted tin box matched an employee of the university's finance office, a man who had quietly resigned in 2018. His whereabouts were unknown. The walls of secrecy were cracking. The discovery of Clara's ID badge and the tin box was enough to crack the silence wide open. Eastwood University's once pristine reputation quickly turned into a battlefield of speculation, media frenzy, and whispered conversations in every hallway. For Linda and Mark Matthews, Clara's parents, it wasn't closure, it was a reopening of the wound that had never healed. They weren't any closer to knowing what had happened to their daughter, but they were finally certain. She hadn't walked away from her life. Someone had taken her. Detectives who had once filed Clara's case into the cold pile now found themselves under scrutiny. New leadership brought in fresh eyes, and with the FBI involved, no stone would be left unturned this time. The first order of business was to reconstruct Clara's final 48 hours. Every person she interacted with, every text she sent, every line from her notes was analyzed. The image of Clara walking out of the library at 11:47 p.m. was played again and again. Behind her, reflected faintly in the glass, headlights of the dark sedan flickered. Detectives now believed Clara left the library expecting to meet someone. The journal confirmed it. She wasn't taken by surprise. She had walked into a meeting she believed was crucial to her investigation. But who had lured her out? Professor Daniel Hargrove became the natural first target. He had mentored Clara, and according to multiple students, encouraged them to take risks in investigative journalism. But there was a darker layer. Emails between Hargrove and Clara revealed heated arguments about her investigation. "Clara, you're protecting them. Why? Hargrove, you're not ready to take on something this big. Back away before it destroys you." For investigators, it was ambiguous. Was this the warning of a concerned mentor? Or the plea of someone complicit? Surveillance footage showing a man in a trench coat. Hargrove often wore one. Near the sedan the night Clara disappeared was damning. When confronted, Hargrove admitted he was on campus that night, but denied any involvement. Yes, I told Clara to back off, because I was scared for her. But I didn't hurt her. I respected her too much. Despite his insistence, public opinion turned. Protests erupted outside his office. Social media branded him the villain. But investigators still didn't have the missing link, proof. The FBI forensic team's discovery of DNA on the tin box was a breakthrough. It matched Richard Collins, a mid-level financial administrator at Eastwood University. Collins had worked quietly in the shadows, processing transactions and overseeing certain funds. He resigned abruptly in 2018, a year after Clara's disappearance. When investigators traced his past, an alarming pattern emerged. Collins had purchased property 2 towns away under an alias. He'd transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars into offshore accounts. He was living far beyond his reported salary. But most disturbing of all, records showed Collins had worked late in the administration building on November 12, 2017, the same night Clara vanished. By now, Clara's notes began to make sense. She had written Hargrove, as if questioning his involvement. But beneath his name, she had underlined another, Collins. Police weren't satisfied with the tin box. If Clara had hidden that, there might be more. They returned to the Arboretum with ground-penetrating radar. Weeks of careful excavation revealed something chilling. A buried phone, wrapped in plastic, decayed but partially functional. It was Clara's. Technicians painstakingly extracted fragments of data. Among them was an audio recording, corrupted but salvageable in pieces. The voice was faint but clear enough. Clara, I'm here. You said you had the documents, proof. I can't stay long, but... Unknown male. You don't understand, Clara. If this gets out, people will die. Clara, what are you talking about? It's fraud, right? It's money. That's all. Mail. It's more than money. They'll come for you too. Then the file cut to static. The revelation twisted the case. This wasn't just about embezzlement. Something darker was at play. The FBI discovered that Collins wasn't just pocketing university funds. He was tied to a shell company laundering money for a private defense contractor. Millions intended for education had been funneled into black-budget projects. If Clara had exposed this, it would have sparked a national scandal, which raised the most chilling question yet. Did someone silence her not out of panic, but as part of a coordinated effort to keep everything buried? In 2023, a tip led investigators to an isolated cabin in Vermont. Inside they found Collins gaunt, paranoid, and armed. He surrendered without resistance. During interrogation, Collins insisted he had never hurt Clara. He admitted to meeting her but claimed he was only trying to scare her away. She knew too much. If she had published, it would have ruined everyone. They told me to stop her. I never saw her again after that night. They. That single word reignited speculation. Collins refused to say who he meant. He claimed he feared for his life even in custody. But detectives noticed something strange. Collins referred to Clara in the present tense. She's strong. She won't break. She's out there somewhere. Was this delusion? Or a clue? Forensic experts re-examined the envelope found in 2022. The paper fibers dated back at least 5 years, meaning it had likely been hidden since shortly after Clara vanished. The typed font was traced to a model of typewriter found in the administration building's basement storage. Even more chilling, the adhesive on the seal contained traces of Collins's saliva. If Collins planted the envelope, why wait 5 years? Why not sooner? Eleanor Price, the private investigator, offered a theory. Collins wasn't the mastermind. He was the pawn. The envelope was a leash, a way to keep the investigation alive, but only just enough to distract from the real players. Through all of this, Linda, Clara's mother, remained relentless. She went back through Clara's belongings, rereading every notebook, every assignment, every scrap of paper. In one, she found a draft of Clara's unfinished exposé. At the bottom of the page was a chilling note. If anything happens to me, look for the truth in the records of the Holloway Grant. The Holloway Grant was a major scholarship program at Eastwood University. Investigators dug into it and discovered nearly 40% of its funds had disappeared without explanation over 5 years. The money trail led to the same defense contractor Collins was linked to, but this time the paper trail implicated high-ranking trustees. By now, the case had ballooned far beyond one missing student. It was pulling at the strings of a web that connected academia, corporate defense, and possibly government figures. Clara, at just 21, had stumbled into the kind of story that seasoned journalists rarely touch without protection, and she had paid the price. The Holloway grant scandal was the crack that finally split the dam wide open. Federal subpoenas landed on the desks of Eastwood University's highest-ranking trustees. Investigators discovered multiple ghost students had been awarded scholarships, students who didn't exist. Their funds had been funneled through the grant system, laundered into shell companies, and rerouted toward secret defense contracts. Clara Matthew had been right. She had uncovered the heart of it 5 years earlier, but the haunting question lingered. If Clara was silenced for what she knew, where was she now? After weeks in custody, Richard Collins finally broke. He requested to speak with Clara's parents privately. Linda and Mark Matthew were brought into the sterile interview room, their faces lined with 5 years of sleepless nights. Collins's voice trembled. "I never meant for her to die. That night, I picked her up near the library. I told her to drop it. She wouldn't. She kept pushing, asking for documents. I was supposed to hand her over. They were waiting." Mark slammed his fists on the table. "Who was waiting, Collins?" "Who?" Collins whispered one name, Dean Whitmore. The revelation stunned everyone. Dean Harold Whitmore wasn't just a faculty figurehead. He was the public face of Eastwood University, a man who had given countless speeches about honor, integrity, and student success. But behind the curtain, Whitmore was tied to the defense contractors, orchestrating the laundering scheme, and using Collins as a pawn. Collins confessed to driving Clara to the edge of a forest preserve on Whitmore's orders. He claimed she was alive when he left her there. Whitmore had arrived with another man, and Collins never saw Clara again. Armed with Collins's testimony, investigators combed the forest preserve outside Eastwood. Cadaver dogs were deployed. Days of searching revealed nothing, until one handler stopped near a cluster of ancient oaks. Buried deep beneath the roots was a sealed steel container. Inside were fragments of clothing, degraded but recognizable. Clara's jacket from the security footage. Alongside it was her missing laptop, wiped clean, but the hard drive contained encrypted folders tied directly to the Holloway grant. The discovery ignited a media firestorm. But one thing was missing: Clara's body. Whitmore denied everything. He called Collins a liar, a desperate man framing others to save himself. But forensic analysis connected Whitmore's fingerprints to the steel container. His DNA was found on the adhesive of the very envelope that had surfaced 5 years later. Under mounting pressure, Whitmore's empire collapsed. Trustees distanced themselves. Former allies turned witnesses. He was arrested and charged with conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to kidnapping. But even as he was led into custody, Whitmore smirked. "You'll never find her. Some secrets stay buried." The trial of State versus Dean Whitmore became one of the most sensational cases of the decade. Prosecutors painted him as the architect of a chilling cover-up, a man who used power and prestige to silence anyone who threatened his empire. Linda Matthews sat in the front row every day, clutching Clara's notebook like a lifeline. Reporters described her as unflinching, her presence a quiet demand for justice. Collins testified, recounting the night Clara disappeared in vivid detail. His trembling words painted Whitmore as the one who ordered her silence. The defense tried to paint Collins as unreliable, but the physical evidence, the badge, the envelope, the fingerprints, told another story. For weeks, the world watched. The courtroom became a stage where greed, corruption, and tragedy collided. Finally, after 36 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty. Whitmore was sentenced to life without parole. Even with Whitmore convicted, closure felt incomplete. Clara Matthews' body had never been recovered. For Linda and Mark, there was no grave to visit, no certainty. 6 months after the trial, a maintenance worker in the preserve stumbled upon a hollow in one of the oaks. Inside were brittle bones wrapped in a nurse's scarf. Dental records confirmed the unthinkable. Clara had been hidden there all along. It wasn't the ending anyone wanted, but it was the truth. Clara's story became more than a tragedy. It became a rallying cry. Journalists across the nation told her story as a warning about corruption, abuse of power, and the price of truth. Scholarships were created in her name for aspiring investigative reporters. Documentaries were produced. Her final notes, painstakingly reconstructed from her laptop, were published posthumously under the title, The Holloway Files. For Linda and Mark, the pain never left. But they carried pride too, that their daughter had been brave enough to fight a monster far larger than herself. And for the world, Clara Matthew was no longer just another missing student. She was a symbol of what it means to confront darkness, even when the cost is unbearable. The courthouse was a fortress of tension. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing as prosecutors, defense attorneys, and witnesses filed in. The nation had been gripped by the case for months, and now it was finally moving to its most decisive moment. Justice for Clara Matthew. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. The jury sat stiffly in the box, their eyes darting between the prosecution table and the man accused of orchestrating one of the most sinister crimes in recent memory. Dean Harold Whitmore, once the respected face of Eastwood University, now wore a gray suit that hung loosely on his frame. He looked diminished, yet his eyes still carried that faint glint of arrogance, the look of a man who believed himself untouchable. Linda and Mark Matthews sat in the front row. Linda clutched Clara's worn leather notebook in her lap, her knuckles pale. Mark kept his eyes fixed on Whitmore, his jaw clenched tight. For them, this wasn't just a trial. It was the last hope of pulling Clara's voice out of the silence of the grave. The state's attorney, Margaret Holbrook, began with a voice that was calm yet unyielding. She turned to the jury. This is not just about corruption. This is not just about embezzled funds or misused grants. This is about a young woman, Clara Matthew, who uncovered the truth, and for that she paid with her life. Dean Harold Whitmore silenced her to protect his empire. The evidence you will see proves not only his greed, but his willingness to destroy anyone who stood in his way. She displayed the steel container recovered from the forest preserve. Its corroded edges, the scraps of Clara's jacket, and the hard drive fragments were all laid out before the jury. Then came the most haunting piece, the sealed envelope. Its edges yellowed, its adhesive strip still carrying Whitmore's DNA. Gasps echoed in the courtroom as Holbrook reminded the jury. This envelope appeared 5 years after Clara's disappearance. It did not surface by accident. It was a message, a reminder of the loose thread he thought he had cut. But he was wrong. The room shifted when Richard Collins took the stand. Shackled in prison khakis, he avoided Linda's gaze as he recounted the night Clara vanished. His voice cracked, but every word was a dagger. She was relentless. She kept asking questions, asking for files. I told her to let it go, but she wouldn't. I was supposed to scare her, that's all. But Whitmore, he said she had to disappear. I drove her to the forest. I left her there alive. Then Whitmore showed up. The defense pounced, painting Collins as a desperate man shifting blame. The defense attorney, Gregory Haynes, pressed him hard. Mr. Collins, you admit you drove her. You admit you handed her over. Why should we believe you weren't the one who killed her? Collins's hands shook. Because I was a coward, not a killer. Whitmore is the killer. I saw him go into the trees. I never saw her again. Linda and Mark Matthew were called to the stand. Their testimony wasn't about evidence. It was about human loss. Linda spoke softly, her voice trembling yet resolute. Clara wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She believed truth mattered. She told me she felt like someone was following her the week before she vanished. She was scared, but she still kept going, because she thought she could make a difference. Her words broke through the legal jargon and technicalities. Jurors wiped their eyes. Even the judge shifted uncomfortably. Clara was no longer a statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, a life cut short. Whitmore's team fought viciously. They claimed Clara was unstable, obsessed, prone to exaggeration. They suggested she may have staged her disappearance, pointing to the lack of an immediate body. They painted Whitmore as a scapegoat for Collins's crimes. Whitmore himself testified, a rare, risky move. He sat tall, his voice polished, rehearsed. I devoted my life to Eastwood University. The idea that I would harm a student, any student, is absurd. I am guilty only of trusting the wrong people. Richard Collins is the one you should fear, not me." His smirk returned as he glanced at the jury, as though daring them to convict him. The prosecution's final blow came from forensic analysis. A fingerprint examiner revealed that Whitmore's print wasn't just on the envelope, it was pressed into the adhesive seal. The expert explained, "You cannot accidentally leave a fingerprint inside an envelope seal. This print came from the person who licked, pressed, and sealed it shut." The courtroom erupted. Whitmore shifted in his chair for the first time, the smirk wiped clean. The jury's eyes locked on him, not as a dean, but as a predator. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. Hours turned into a full day. Then finally the court was summoned. The foreman rose, his voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Dean Harold Whitmore, guilty on all counts." Whitmore's face drained of color. Linda collapsed into Mark's arms, tears streaming. For the first time in 5 years, there was a sense of justice. The judge's gavel fell, sentencing Whitmore to life without the possibility of parole. His empire crumbled in that instant, reduced to nothing but a prisoner's number. Months later, a worker stumbled across the hollowed oak in the preserve. Inside were Clara's skeletal remains, wrapped in her nurse's scarf. The discovery closed the final chapter. Tragic, but undeniable. She had been there all along, hidden in plain sight by the very man who had pretended to champion students. Clara Matthews' story didn't end in that forest. Her courage lived on in the changes that followed. Eastwood University was dismantled and rebuilt under federal oversight. A Clara Matthews Scholarship for Investigative Journalism was founded, ensuring her spirit of truth lived on. Documentaries, books, and films spread her story worldwide, warning of the dangers of unchecked corruption. For Linda and Mark, closure was bittersweet. They had their daughter's remains to bury, but her bravery had ensured her voice echoed far louder than Whitmore's silence ever could. Clara became a symbol, not of tragedy alone, but of unyielding truth. And so, the story ended not with her disappearance, but with the revelation of a young woman's legacy, a legacy powerful enough to bring down giants.